Hey folks, it's Gregg Bendian again. Welcome to the ProgCast, where we get into all sorts of different kinds of music of the creative variety. And you know that I have some of the classic cats on the show from time to time, but I also like to have people on who are creating music of the moment and music that is sort of evolving all around us right now and not in the historic variety, but definitely tethered to history in many ways. And I was lucky enough to see a live concert. I'll start with that. I was lucky enough to recently see a live concert at Webster Hall in New York, where uh, I always have the habit of showing up for the opening band because I want to know if something cool might happen there. And if not, well, you took a chance. And I went to see Louis Cole Big Band at Webster Hall, and big fan of Louis Cole. Louis, if you ever want to come on the program, man, I would love to chat with you about drumming and rhythm and all of that. Big fan of Knower. And so it was no surprise, but a pleasant one in that I got to hear Dandu play a trio set, I think of about 30 minutes, and I was revealed their world and found so much there that harkens back to classic jazz, but also has flavors of hip hop and Dilla and so many different color choices by a keyboard player who's using the technology very musically, and a bass player who's writing and is creating a kind of collective trio. And it's, there's something magical about the number three, I think, and I'm always been attracted to trios with keyboards, going back to Egg with Dave Stewart. And so this to me was a real revelation, and I'm so happy to welcome these guys to the show. Ben Wyrick, the keyboardist, Dylan Johnson, the drummer, and Sean Danduran is the bassist of Dandu. Welcome, guys.
Thanks for having us on.
Thanks so much.
So yeah, I really was knocked out by your set, and it was just such a breath of fresh air to hear people doing their thing right now in an instrumental way, because that is such a challenge, isn't it, to present instrumental music to people now without having them talk and sort of treat it as a social event. Because I remember going back to jam band beginnings where people came to talk and smoke cigarettes, and when you could still do that, and bands would be up there trying to play some instrumental music. But also then I've seen Weather Report in the classic day where they were in a concert hall. So that's how I view your stuff, is music that you listen to, and there's a lot of detail and there's a lot of subtlety, especially on the drums there, and some really cool stuff happening. So tell me a little bit about your background. We could start with Sean if you want to tell me some stuff about your origins. I'm very curious.
Yeah. So I started playing music when I was a little kid. Oh, there we go. I got a little kitty in the house. But yeah, I started playing music when I was a little kid. I started on cello, and then got a bass guitar when I was 10. And pretty much I just grew up in the classical world until I started, jamming rock music with my friends in our basement in
I'm
high
going to
school.
stop you right there.
Yeah.
Because the classical world piece is something I'd like to hear a little bit about.
Yeah, totally. So I grew up playing Suzuki on the cello. I was in youth orchestras since pretty much I can remember, like 5. But yeah, I never really liked the cello. I remember it was always like I had to do it. And then when I was 10, I was going to get a guitar, and my sister was like, Sean, if you get a bass, you can be in my punk rock band. So I was like, all right, I'm getting a bass. And the rule in my house was you had to play a classical instrument until you were 12, and then you could do whatever.
Because
just because that was the rule. I have two older sisters. The oldest one wanted to play violin, and I think my parents just decided like, hey, let's have all our kids do that. So I'm the youngest of three. I have two older sisters. One played violin, one played cello, and then I played cello. And so when I got the bass guitar, my cello teacher at the time pretty much told my parents that it was obvious I did not care at all. And she was like, you should have him play upright bass, to finish out the classical thing. So in middle school, I started doing upright bass. And then I ended up going to Denver School of the Arts, which is like a magnet school here. And I did orchestra up until like 18.
So what repertoire was attractive to you as a musician coming up in terms of the classical stuff?
Oh, none of it. I didn't like any of it. It wasn't until, oh gosh, I think maybe my sophomore or junior year of high school, we played Isle of the Dead. And we did it with the dance company. And I remember it was when I had first, I was smoking pot at that time. And I remember being in orchestra and there's this huge, 80-person production going on with this dark, it's a dark piece of music. And I remember being like, whoa, this is pretty cool.
So that's cool. Because
yeah.
That's like a multimedia experience of the best case scenario, really, for a young musician, I think.
Definitely.
Playing in pit musicals in high school, as shitty as they were amazing experiences for me because you had to figure out a way to deal and coordinate and, make something happen. And so I could see why that would stick out. That's really interesting. And was it kind of modern and dark?
Yeah, definitely. And I just remember being so grateful for the goofy conductor / teacher we had, because the dance teacher was just so harsh and just working these kids. Later on, they got fired because they were so crazy. But so it was dark. The music and the dance was dark, but the dynamic was slightly dark too, I remember. But I also did Elton John's version of Aida. So you're talking about being in the pit. That definitely shaped me a lot as well.
Yeah. Now, did you go on to study in college in the jazz world, or is this all homespun?
Yeah, the jazz thing is homespun for me. I went to community college and took ear training and a couple basic music classes, but pretty much since high school, I've just been learning myself.
And who were the bass players you enjoy?
Oh gosh, right now or back then?
Okay.
Oh man. Well, I think in college, one person that really stuck out to me, I was living in Boulder at the time. So Garrett Sayers, he had a big influence on my playing. He plays for this group, the Motet. And I know he used to be on the East Coast. I think I don't know if it's right, but I know he was maybe taught by Bob Moses and is kind of in that circle. But bass players I really like now. Oh gosh, that's so funny. I just feel so on the spot. I'm trying to think of who I listen to.
Well, I mean, who were your electric bass playing influences?
Oh man, growing up, my biggest bass playing influences, Bootsy Collins is probably number one. I was buying his strings before I had even heard him play. I remember my bass teacher was like, Sean, you got to get these Bootzillas, no matter what you do, just get these strings. So Bootsy's always been up there for me. I loved for so many years Justin Chancellor of Tool. That was a huge thing for me. Trevor Dunn of Mr. Bungle. That guy. Yeah, I love that guy. And then when this group started, Thundercat was definitely my biggest inspiration. I had just bought his first album and just my mind was blown.
And what's interesting is Thundercats that emerges a while ago, so there's enough of an arc there where now it's like almost like you guys are on the tip of another generation after him,
Yeah,
right?
I
He's
mean,
about 10 years older than you, isn't he?
yeah, I would say so. I mean, I don't know how old he is, but I remember getting that record, Golden Age of Apocalypse, a decade ago.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I know my son turned me on to that stuff 10 years ago, and he's a drummer that came up the way Dylan did, hearing all the different rhythms and Dilla and all the
Hmm.
stuff that became sort of the new language. Um, really looking forward to having Dennis Chambers, the great drummer, on the program in the future. We're going to talk about Dilla and Dilla's influence on drumming, because that's a whole other way of looking at rhythm that makes so much musical sense if you're like me and you loathe symmetry.
Man, I got a funny Dennis Chambers story.
Wait a minute, here we go. Let's go, Ben Wyrick.
Well, so like we opened for Victor Wooten like maybe 5 years ago or so, and at the Boulder Theater, and Dennis Chambers was in his group, and I forget, it was a trio. There was a saxophone player.
Sax player. They played at William Paterson, yeah, where I teach.
Yeah. And yeah, we opened for him, and it was a great show. Victor Wooten is like such a kind person. I think me and Sean both went to master classes with him when we were in high school. Super sweet guy. And he was loving on us and made us feel really welcome and great. And after the show, I went up to Dennis Chambers, and he was just sitting by himself, like front row, and everybody's out of the theater, drinking a beer, and went up to him and was just like, hey, you're an incredible musician. It's been an honor to share the stage with you, this and that, just, kind of fawning over him. And he just was staring at me, never said a word. I got done with my whole spiel about how he's the greatest, and he just like deadpan looked at me, said nothing, and I waited a solid 10 seconds for a response, didn't get anything, and it was just like, all right, thanks, and then walked away, just like full of uncertainty and shame, and did not know how to take it.
That's
Still down.
strange.
Yeah.
But whatever. It's all good.
I don't know. It's interesting when the older cats hear the new generation. Like, I noticed how Herbie really felt strongly about Thundercat right away.
Right.
And that whole strain of Herbie with Austin Peralta, and Pasqua with Austin Peralta, and like all the different. We've been joking about this thing recently with my friends over at Weird Music. Andre and I will say, you better recognize, because there's this thing about what the stuff that comes after you and the way that you perceive it. Some guys like Jocko felt that they were being ripped off.
Right.
Could have been a heartfelt tribute, or just a huge musical impact. Like, I don't know how he felt about Victor Bailey, but I mean, Victor Bailey's a post-Jocko bass player, but he had his own thing. So it's like, I would hope that Dennis was tired and he was just trying to telepathically tell you how great you were, or maybe you guys sucked that night. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I did not really take it personally. And
No.
I think, you were kind of touching on this. I think I think especially when you're playing jazz and improvised music, there's like kind of an expectation that you have like this knowledge of the history of that music. And
well, it's helpful.
It's helpful, of course. I mean, there's so much knowledge to be passed down. And I think we're an example of a band that, I mean, at least on me and Sean's side, like we don't have a lot of that historical teachings and haven't had like jazz heads passed down that knowledge to us.
So you guys exist in Denver growing up in a vacuum where you're consuming what, Ben?
Well, I grew up in central New York.
Oh,
And
where?
yeah, I grew up like right outside of Syracuse in a
Oh, word.
small
Okay,
town
great.
called Skinny Atlas.
Yeah, I know
But
where that is.
I also grew up with classical music. Both my parents are classical musicians. My mom's a cellist in the Syracuse Symphony, and my dad is a piano teacher and has taught all over the place. So yeah, both very classical, and I grew up playing classical music too, from a very young age. And yeah, I didn't really get into jazz until high school from peers kind of showing me stuff. And I'm also totally self-taught and have never really gotten any formal teaching when it comes
Just
to.
because it's in the house?
I mean, not self-taught. Like I grew up taking classical piano lessons, and also did upright in orchestra. But I got into improvised music because I was also a guitar player, and there was like a hippie in town who taught guitar and, would teach us to jam, and got super into the Dead and stuff like that at the time, but was also getting shown like Medeski, Martin, and Wood from a really young age, and then got into like the Bad Plus and kind of more crossover stuff, and then just got deeper and deeper into jazz. But for whatever reason, I think it was just I was more comfortable with classical music. Like I kept going in that direction when it came to piano, because I had that formal teaching, and when it came time to like go to college, that was like the obvious thing to do, just because that's how I could get into college and go to a music program, which I knew I wanted to do.
So where did you go?
That's when I moved to Colorado. I went to Boulder. I went to CU.
How was that program?
It was fine. I mean, it was never something I was passionate about, so it didn't last very long. I went, my teacher was this woman, Doris Leonard, who was like a child prodigy, this Russian lady, very small, like powerhouse Russian lady. And she just had like these giant eyes that would just see through your soul, and like could tell exactly, how many hours of practice you put in that week, and like was so intimidating. And yeah, I was, smoking a lot of pot when I moved to Boulder, just the normal college thing, and burnt out really quick. And it was actually my dad, who's the classical piano teacher, who first told me, like, you're not into this. You're kind of wasting money here. Like, this isn't going anywhere. And so I dropped out after like a year and a half, and then have just been self-teaching more or less through playing with peers, and eventually finding Sean a year after that.
But that time you're listening to what?
I'm listening to, I mean, at that time I'm getting burnt out on kind of the jam scene, which was a big reason I moved to Boulder, because there was a huge jam scene there, and at that time I think I was like pretty focused on guitar. And I was really into the Wood Brothers, and really into like more folky stuff, but also still into jazz big time. And like I've been listening to like Vijay Iyer and the Bad Plus, and I don't know, Matthew Shipp, I think at that time I was super into.
I mean, you definitely showed me Bilal and Robert Glasper when I first met you.
Yeah, Glasper.
Yeah.
Hiatus Coyote?
Hiatus Coyote, for sure.
Oh yeah, when they put out that first record, it was Nate who showed us that one.
Badu?
Nate
Yeah.
Toast.
Oh, Toast. Was it
Toast?
Really? Oh,
Yeah, it was Toast. But yeah, Badu, D'Angelo.
Yeah. Yeah, I was super into funk too. I was into like the meters and stuff. I had the really lucky opportunities in early high school. I think really being around like central New York and the proximity to NYC, I was able to go to a couple of music camps in the summer that like really fueled my love for improvised music. I went to, speaking of aquarium rescue unit, I went to a summer camp that had O'Teal Burbridge and Jimmy Herring and this drummer Simon Lott. You know him? He's from New Orleans. And they did like kind of a jazz program, and was just being kind of under their wing for a week really like fed my love for more groovy jazz music and like kind of the New Orleans scene. And
Jimmy's so great too. I mean, I think Jimmy's just one of the most musical guitar players ever.
Yeah, absolutely. They're incredible. That's when I was introduced to Aquarium Rescue Unit, and that was eye-opening. And I also went to, speaking of Medeski, Martin, and Wood, they had a summer camp in like Woodstock, New York.
Right.
I went to that one summer. And
at Big Indian?
Yeah. Or it was like Full Moon Resort or something like that.
Yeah, I did. Todd Rundgren had me drum for him during that one time, and it was it was kind of weird.
It's I
could only imagine what the Medeski Martin crowd would be like, because Todd's crowd was that 40 years older. And it was like
all ages. It was people from like, 70 years old to, I think the youngest was like 14 or something like that. I was probably 16, 17 maybe.
So it was or wasn't a party situation?
It wasn't a party situation.
Cool. Okay.
It was pretty formal, and it was pretty small. There was like.
Did you get with Billy?
Yeah. All three of them were there, and they had guest artists come in. Bob Moses was one. One of the master musicians of Jujuka. Do you know about them?
Yeah, I do. They play with Ornette.
Yeah. So they had someone come that was fucking incredible. And who was the last person? Oh, it was Vernon Reed, guitar player of Living Color.
Cool.
Really, that was an incredible experience. I learned a lot from that, and still take from that experience. But it was amazing. It was really cool. And that also, I would say, probably changed like how I approached music for a long time. And we'll be forever grateful for that. It was really fun. And I actually have met, I think, 3 people who I keep in contact with and have played with since then, over the last 10 years, which is really cool. But yeah.
Let me pause for a minute, guys.
Sure. Dylan, do you have COVID?
I do have COVID, yeah.
Sorry, guys. Too many things going on at once.
Oh, it's all good. Both these guys.
Please, Ben,
COVID,
continue.
We do have COVID, yeah.
Yeah, I was just saying that I have COVID. I don't know where I was really going with what I was saying earlier.
Well, what I would say to all of that is that those are formative experiences where, if you're lucky, and I was growing up in northern New Jersey, where we just went to see everything. And then the cats were going to talk to you or not. I mean, Sun Ra was really nice to us. We were in high school, I mean, you never know what you're going to get, but Sun Ra was nice. Jimmy Lyons was really nice. I mean, there were guys who would make themselves available. Holdsworth was nice.
Yeah. I mean, Victor Wooten, like we were talking about him, he was super nice every time I've met him, and I think is one of those people who really brings people in and has a wealth of knowledge to give freely.
Dude, funny enough, I'll never forget, at that show, Victor Wooten was like, all right, check those guys out at dandu.com. And I look over at Dylan, I was like, did you tell him we have a website? And Dylan's like, yeah. And I was like, we don't have a website.
You did
so
the
I
next
created
day.
a website for us that night.
Shit, I gotta make a website now.
Yeah, you did. Well, listen, I want to hear from Dylan because Dylan, I really dug your style, man, and
Thanks.
I see it as almost like, and I don't know if this is even your world, but just like an amalgam of so many different types of grooves and textures and tastefulness and musicality
Yeah.
uh, that's about so much serving the music and not overplaying and sort of making little things big things and really serving the music and so I really enjoyed listening to you and wanted to serve you that compliment.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you so much. Uh, definitely.
So tell me what you got into when you were a little guy hitting on things.
When I was a little kid, uh, I was more into like rock and roll actually, or like hard rock. Um, I don't know. I remember listening to like System of a Down, Primus actually, and it wasn't until high school that I started getting into like uh, more fusion stuff, listening to Marcus Miller and I don't know Dennis Chambers, obviously, and but yeah, I've been in like uh, music programs, jazz band and stuff since middle school. Um, so I was playing jazz that way, but wasn't really listening to it on my own time. And that didn't start for me until probably college. When I was listening to some more modern stuff, the Bad Plus again, Knee Body, um, who else? And then I don't know, also some like weird indie stuff. Uh, Andrew Bird was a big influence on me. I liked all the stuff he did with looping. Yeah, I don't know.
You reminded me a bit of Perrin from Hiatus.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely love Hiatus Coyote. Listen to them a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And that approach is so slick and so hip that I mean I kind of first noticed it with him, but I don't even I'm not even saying I'm authority on where it starts from, but it's an interesting thing where tape and drum machines start to influence how we approach the kit.
yeah, yeah. It's definitely interesting. Yeah, like crossover.
I had a conversation with Billy Hart one time where he said regarding drum machines and how it's influenced the way we play the drum kit. He said, I think it's become a John Henry situation. You guys know the legend of John Henry?
No, this is right on.
I'm
Yeah.
so old.
And
It's he was a steel driving man and he would drive spikes and he was this big hulking guy and he went up against a steam engine. He went up against, a steam driven uh,
And did he win?
machine and he didn't win.
Oh, he didn't win.
No, I don't think he did win.
so does that mean drummers are losing against the drum machine?
No, I don't know. I just find the analog interesting of technology influencing how we make sounds, technology
Yeah.
influencing how we can move quickly now through sounds. I mean, I used to have to like take stuff off my kit and like take clamps off a cymbal, like do all this stuff, and guys can just sit there like with pads and do all this stuff now,
Yeah.
which is
I mean,
fine. Uh,
the hip thing for drumming, I think, for a while. Like, since like Jojo Mayer and Nerve and Juliana's really certainly gotten into that. And yeah, just like the whole kind of drum and bass style working its way into jazz has been a thing for a while now.
And very, very interesting and very healthy. And, music and rhythm are always evolving. I was going to mention Harvey Mason to you, Dylan. Does that ring a bell?
No, I don't know that name.
First Headhunters album?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Sure.
Like that's the beginning of something which was taught to me by Herbie, who said that style of drumming, which is going to be then like Tony Smith in the Jan Hammer group and Mike Clark right after on Thrust, was called the Oakland Stroke. And I always thought that was cool. That had like its own sort of like, yeah, you're not going to like beat the shit out of the drums. And it's going to be about, a kind of flow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? And touch. And that originates and Harvey Mason was a huge star on his own, in that regard. And I feel like him and Billy Cobham sort of started this ability to move very gracefully through a lot of different combinations of bass drum, snare drum, and hi-hat.
Yeah.
Totally.
And then much more, but that's that thing that I noticed with you, Dylan.
Right on. Yeah.
The
And with
COVID
that,
off.
he passed on. His final moments filled with compliments and praise, and he left this world. Captured here on video for all to see.
Dylan's laughing.
I think
I'm so
on that
glad to be
there's
there. Do you have?
that's it.
Let's address this. Do you have COVID?
I do have COVID. Yeah.
I went through it.
And so do I.
So
I
did
just
Fred.
found out an hour ago that I also have COVID.
We both have COVID.
And do you have you sound better than him?
Yeah, I wouldn't know. My fiance tested positive. She works in the healthcare industry, and she took a test because they just do that like every day now. And she's got it, and so I decided to take a test, and I've got it. And I wouldn't know unless I, took a test. But we'll see where it goes.
Right.
It could take a minute, but you know what? You guys are young and healthy.
Yeah, it's honestly a relief. Like I haven't gotten it once, and like the music community in Denver right now is full of COVID in every way. Like I think maybe 30 or 40 people in the last 3 weeks. I know
Our
personally.
venues, everything's canceled in Denver.
I mean,
No.
not even. No,
Half
Denver,
of it's canceled, but
yeah.
it's
But
like
I
it's like if it can happen, they're doing it. But
Is it
fuck.
cold right now?
No, not even. It's like 55 today, but I think Denver, Denver is got kind of it's still got the old cowtown mentality a little bit. Like people are just very lax, I think, compared to, bigger cities in the East Coast and on the West Coast. I don't know. I think there's a very lackadaisical view of COVID right now. People are just kind of tired of it and don't care and, are gonna live their lives.
Yeah, and everybody can, I think, understand, what's at stake and be able to hopefully make the right choices given their situations,
Yeah.
I would love, to have more gigs happening, but at the same time, you do see a mixed bag of, and what I've noticed recently, like at your show, you guys were sold out, I think, with Lewis Cole.
Close to.
And I think Crumb sold out all 3 of the East Coast venues that I was aware of. I mean, so there are people going to shows, and then there are classic acts like Pat Metheny or Todd Rundgren. We're seeing half to 3/4 where ticket sales were greater than those that showed up. So there were people that were buying tickets that weren't showing up. That was interesting too.
It's kind of nice. It's kind of like
Yeah, and they were interpreting it as that they were supporting the artist.
Yeah.
So,
Mm.
you
Yeah,
know,
like when we were in Boston the night before New York, it was fucking packed. Like I remember being like, whoa, this is like a pre-pandemic club gig right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we went on that tour like just before Omicron.
yeah, you
Really.
guys did. It's like the Zappa Crimson tour was able to happen because they just sort of got in the last moments before this whole thing dropped. But yeah, so you guys did how many shows with Lewis Cole?
We did 4.
Four. Yeah, we did Boston, New York, Chicago, and then ended it in Denver.
And how did that come about?
Well, okay, so we have a buddy in Chicago who we've played some gigs with, like just met him from us touring there. And his friend is Lewis Cole's manager. And we had lent another one of her artists like a piece of drum gear a while ago when they were in Denver. So I don't know. We were on her radar pretty much. And she's like, hey, Jesse said that you guys would be good for Denver and Chicago. And these shows were actually scheduled before the pandemic even happened. So we were like, yeah, let's do Denver and Chicago. And she had asked us if we wanted to do Boston and New York. And I was like, yeah, but we've never been there. So, she was like, okay, no, like we need someone who can draw. And then literally a week before the New York show, I was doing an interview with this local publication and the guy's like, hey, so you guys are opening for Lewis Cole in New York City? And I was like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. He's like, well, it's on their website. And sure enough, it was on Webster Hall's website that we were opening. And so I hit up Lewis Cole's manager and I was like, hey, what's going on? It says we're playing. She's like, oh, no, you're not. Don't worry about it. And I was like, okay, cool. That, like, how are we going to get out there anyway? And then 2 days later, she emails me and she's like, well, do you guys want to do Boston and New York since you were on it by mistake? It was, and
happened.
yeah, immediately I'm like looking up flights, calling these dudes. And yeah, so we flew out to Boston, rented a drum set from Guitar Center. We had friends in New York and Chicago lend us drum sets. Ben did the good old Guitar Center rental for a couple keyboard stands the first night.
Yeah, it was my first time like flying and playing, I think, for all of us, which
Yep.
Yeah.
Wow.
I didn't have an amp the whole run, which was nice.
Yeah. Oh, you mean so you did monitors every show?
Yeah, I bought the Aguilar Tone Hammer like preamp because I was like, okay. It turns out they would have let me totally use the rig that they were going with, but I was like, let's try it out. But yeah, I mean, Ben had to, instead of using his nice like bass synth, he used my funny little Korg monologue on the road. And yeah, it was cool.
So how fucking amazing is Lewis Cole?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Dude, every night I would just be side stage taking video. And it's just like his pocket's so deep and he doesn't even seem to try.
No, it's
Yeah.
disgusting.
it's disgusting. Yeah, crazy chops. Yeah, his whole band is full of monsters. They're
And
nuts.
the clarity.
Yeah. And how he was honestly so nice too. Like, I'll never forget. I think we were in Chicago. So it was like the third night. And we're like up there sound checking. And he was just behind us, like silently, like listening to like some shit of his. I'm sitting there. I'm like, fuck, we're playing a whole song. He's just standing there right now. And I mean, I don't know. That's just me being nervous. But he's like, oh, yeah, sounds good, guys.
Yeah, it's like the contrast of like him as a person when you just talk to him and his like whole stage internet persona is hilarious. Like he's basically like his stage persona is like basically like a 16-year-old like little shit, and then he's just like a super chill, very whatever, just like
I did notice that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is really fun. It's like a 16-year-old like smart ass.
Totally, yeah. He's just making like dick jokes and stuff. I found one time I was like looking at his charts. I was
tell me
curious.
about that. Yeah.
Yeah, and he like over, like he must have been using like Finale or something, and where you put like the composer's name traditionally, it was either like on some of them it was like your mom, and some of them it was like an 8 = D, like basically just like a dick or like just like shit like that. And it's like, yeah, when you see that, like his stage persona is certainly like a part of his personality, but it's not like the forefront, but yeah.
But he's just like generally exudes positivity.
For sure. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, watching their sound checks, like they were full on rehearsing at every sound check because they met up.
They were a young band or a piece together for that particular run, because I know I've seen other folks on that group.
Yeah, it seems like it.
I mean, he didn't have his normal bass player or keyboard player. Who knows? Maybe they didn't want to tour because of COVID or something. But like, all those horns lived somewhere else. Like a couple of them were in LA, but I mean, the bass player flew in from across the world pretty much.
Yeah, he's Brazilian, right?
I don't think he's Brazilian. I just started following his Instagram, so I could tell you, but I won't do it right now.
I'm pretty sure he's from Rio de Janeiro. And
that's so interesting. Yeah, because I think his presence has become more international. Through the internet, obviously, through bank account, through things that reached what I call civilians. The ability to be able to reach beyond the musician community is something that's always unusual with. I think it's pretty complicated music, but it's also catchy. Lewis Cole, it's like it's complicated, but it's really memorable. And I think having
relatable,
and I think honestly, this format, even with Thundercat, where you've got 2 subjects, 3 max, and you're in and out, and nobody gets hurt, and you leave them with something, and they're very strong themes. And then you can jam on them live.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Also like this weird thing of like. I feel like irony is such a big part of his music, and I think also like with Thundercat, like it's interesting, like the kind of mainstream jazz stuff, like there's just like an ironic like line through all of it. It's like a theme through all of that music, I think.
Definitely.
I mean, like
a sense of humor.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah, the government knows when you masturbate, pizza song, like
yeah, all of that stuff is fun, and at the same time just like really slick. And I find that keyboard sounds right now are an interesting topic, and I love to hear from Ben, because Simon in Hiatus was someone, like the first guy that I noticed as being a sort of post Zawinul, post Herbie, post Chick kind of guy, where orchestration, texture, but also having to have a ripping lead sound, which, sir, you certainly do. And that's something that I love. And hopefully, since we met, you've been listening to Dave Stewart, but I won't hold you to that. But he's your patron saint.
Yeah, I have checked him out, and I have to dive more into it. But yeah, I think you're spot on with like Hiatus Coyote bringing in kind of interesting synth tones to more fusion-y music, and certainly just like Knower and that whole crew. Jacob Mann has been a recent pretty big inspiration as far as like keyboard sounds go. He put out his last 2 albums have been just like pretty silly trio music, but that's super slick. And I say silly because like the synth tones are just like hilarious in some. Like some of them like just sound like a duck or something like that, or like it's kind of just like using using the different tones and attacks and stuff you can get with synths and really bringing it to, you know, composing jazz music is just an interesting concept to me and has been an inspiration.
Yeah.
What's that band called that you love? It's like XNLP or
Oh shit, yeah. LXMP.
Yeah, because they, like, when you started listening to them, that was when I noticed, like, you started doing the more out front tones, more textures.
Yep. Yeah, you're totally right. Have you ever heard of them, Greg?
I have not.
You should check them out. They're a Polish duo.
Oh,
and
wow.
it's a synth player and a drummer who also plays synth bass. So he's doing the one hand drum thing, and he's nuts. You would love him. But it's like kind of jazz fusion video game music, and is like really aggressive. I was introduced to them by Greg Sonnier. You know him? Yeah, my band Day Collage opened for Deerhoof a while ago, and I talked to him for a long time.
Oh, good.
He's one of my favorite drummers. I love him.
Yeah, he's very musical.
But yeah, he turned me onto them, and that totally changed kind of my approach to like making different synth tones and arranging in a way that like really is based around the tone that you have, you know.
Well, and it's more expressive.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, at the same time, I also got into like going back into my classical roots. I'm forgetting his name right now, but this Japanese like old school synth guy from the 70s. Or maybe,
Oh, Tomita.
Yeah, totally. His arrangements of like, you know, Zarathustra, all these classical songs. I love that.
That's so cool because man, shout out to Tomita and the guys that were like Jean-Michel Jarre, who were the first home synth guys that were orchestrating. Well, of course, you know, Wendy Carlos, Ground Zero, but no, I love that because what was the dream of Varese and the composers who had nothing? They had tape. They had tape, they had music concrete if they were lucky. And they fought for what you guys now take for granted, you spoiled bastards.
Yeah, imagining like working on a synth that's like the size of the room that I'm in right now and like, you know, arranging out these masterful classical songs. It's kind of mind-blowing to think about, for sure.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of Yellow Magic Orchestra?
Again, Ryuichi Sakamoto. So another great example, and then I'll throw onto that the brother group of that, Japan, with David Sylvian and the keyboardist Richard. I'm spacing on his last name, but he and that sort of genre of new wave kind of synthy guys. It was kind of like Barbieri. Richard Barbieri, brain fart.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, kind of. It was the beginning of like synths really taking over pop music. And yeah, like Yellow Magic Orchestra. That sounds super modern to me listening to it now. But you know, it was made in the mid-late 70s. And the
XTC stuff, where the synth choices are very tasteful, and most of them wear quite well. Yeah. And you know, this is a whole really interesting area because as a producer, you're always concerned about the sounds and organizing all the tones and, you know, is it the right bass tone this time? Is it the right bass drum sound at this time? You know, is it the right, you know, do we have the dynamics that we need? Do we have the kind of range that we need? And I watched you guys, how facile you were with all of the different texture changes and how important that is to keeping an audience drawn in to what you're doing and not beating them over the head. So the dynamism of the music of Dandu was something I was really happy about. And I wondered then if you guys had listened much to Weather Report.
For sure.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably one of the fusion bands, them and like Mahavishnu are like the top ones I've listened to for sure.
Yeah, same. I grew up with Mahavishnu. That was one of my first fusion records for sure.
Wow.
Flame.
Yeah. What was it? We used to do two like back-to-back Mahavishnu songs when we were first doing the trio. It's like what's that really harsh one off the Inner Flame record?
Oh yeah. Dance of the Maya. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maya. I can't let that go, Ben. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and what was the other one?
It went right into You Know. So we just do the back-to-back, you know.
Yeah.
That's a great transition.
Yeah. For many
yes,
years, yes, I played that music with a group called the Mahavishnu Project. So
Cool.
I know it well and enjoy it. And I'm going to start doing it again, I think, because it's kind of roots music for me in a lot of ways. When I grew up around Turkish and Armenian music, so I knew different rhythmic patterns. I mean, you were not thrown by different rhythmic groupings and the cultures of those two places. The music was 7 and 5 mostly. So then Mahavishnu comes along, and that's my pop music. When it's happening, like we had Birds of Fire on 8-track in my car.
Yes.
Yeah.
8-track. I
was 10. So, I mean, to have sort of been around when that stuff was happening, I got to see Weather Report before Jocko knew who he was. He was Jocko, and he was just standing on stage and playing and with his back to the audience a lot.
Wow.
There was one time, you guys will appreciate this. There's one time I saw the 830 tour. First time I see them as a quartet. Well, first time I see them. And they open and Jocko's playing drums on 830. And it's just Jocko and Joe is opening the show, and he's beating the shit out of the drums. I don't know if you've heard Jocko play drums, but he hit hard. And then, he at one point in the show with his back to the audience, I'm hearing with a harmonic and a low note. And I'm like, that's 3 things right now, and he doesn't want us to see. He had a harmonic, the 16th note finger thing, and a low thing going on at the same time. And I just remember, like, and to this day, I feel really lucky that I saw him before he became the superstar, because like that, I don't think I ever saw him do that again. And he could have, but he sort of shifted into other like greatest hits modes. But fascinating to see the evolution of the bass from in a post-Jocko world, isn't it?
Oh my God, yeah.
And how Thundercat can go out and play 5-minute solos over changes.
What's crazy to me is I didn't realize how much Stanley Clarke had influenced Thundercat. And then one day I was just like, oh my God.
That's another one.
It's all over it,
Yep. The fingering style, everything. It almost looks the same.
Oh yeah. And just how much of a lead bassist Stanley is at times, Like, it's funny because you can like sit there and do fifths and kind of like, I'm not gonna lie, I'll like poke fun. I'll be like, oh, I'm Stanley Clarke right now. And I'll just like do the fifths. But like at the time, who the fuck was doing that?
I will tell you who.
Who?
Colin Hodgkinson, who was on the podcast recently. And you guys missed that episode. But those of you who saw the Colin Hodgkinson episode know that in 72, as early as pre-Electric Stanley, Colin Hodgkinson was playing in a group called Backdoor. And it was alto sax, bass polyphonically played, and drums. So he was the whole harmonic underpinning.
Kind of like Happy Apple.
What's that?
Dave King.
Oh.
And what's the saxophone player's name? He also plays bass in Bon Iver.
And then there was, Primus, and there are these bands, but I mean, Jack Bruce was playing chords on the bass. And the thing about it is the bass is that kind of range polyphonic instrument. Now, look, we're looking at 8 strings now, guitars. We're looking at, extended register on so much stuff, but also now the gear that can back it up, hopefully with some clarity. And that whole register thing is so warm and everyone loves it down there, but it has to be functional, And
Hmm.
so like it's funny because now we're talking about low end and bass, but I find one of the biggest issues when I'm mixing and mastering is, having to check the low end situation on multiple systems to make sure
Yeah.
I'm not crazy. Like, because you can't mix with headphones for stuff like that, really.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
I
like,
always run into the problem of wanting more bass, like to the point where Ben laughs at me. Like, it's just like, I don't know. Bass is so hard on a recording because there's the place where it sits perfectly, but then there's the place where it's just like so muddy or so thin.
You're right.
yeah.
You have
And I think
either.
I mean, these days, like, it seems like mixing for like computer speakers or like shitty iPhone, headphones or whatever, or like even a phone speaker is like kind of just as important as mixing for like, your great home system that you love to listen on. It's
Oh,
like
yeah. Well,
most
like,
people are not going to have that system, and no matter how much like low end you're going to put into it and how much you want to feel it in your chest, like that's just not most people's experience. So like, yeah, important things to consider, I think, for
which
sure.
is why when we're putting out anything, but the bottom line stuff in particular, we do separate mastering for iTunes.
Yeah, for sure.
Totally.
You do separate mastering for different modes of consumption, I think,
Right.
and that makes sense. But yeah, I also remember talking about I worked on the Mahavishnu Orchestra box set with Bob Belden, and there was a bonus disc of the live albums. So there was a full concert of the Mahavishnu Between Nothingness and Eternity double live.
What?
Very
And
cool.
so that's apparently out of print, but maybe it's available on Amazon somewhere. And one of the issues was that bass was always an issue with what guys' rigs were like back in '73, and how much do you want to add to that now? And we also had a direct line from Jerry Goodman's violin, so he wasn't going through an amp. So you're hearing it was like, nails on the chalkboard, right?
Yeah.
And that was in the days of early amp modeling, like 2001 or something. We've looked at pictures online to see what was Jerry playing through in 71 or 72. He's playing through a Sun bass rig.
Oh,
So
wow.
so we found Sun bass rig in the amp modeling scroll, and we put that signal through that, and all of a sudden we had a violin track.
Wow.
It's crazy. And the same thing with the bass. Like, something happened with the bass level, and we were able to take it up like 20 dB or whatever it needed to come up and remove the noise and make it sound realistic. And so bass is always a thing where it has to just be right, and it's sort of the last problem in a way. I don't
Oh,
know,
yeah.
isn't it?
It really is because, like, I mean,
Bass drum and bass, how they sit together.
yeah, and for the bass nowadays, like literally like we're working on an album right now, actually in the room that Ben is sitting in. And we just are DIing my bass, and then we have my bass amp mic'd in a separate room. But
You
it's
have
like you're not really worried about the bass tone. Like, we're gonna spend hours getting the drum tones, but the bass tone, it's like, oh yeah, that sounds decent. Like, let's go.
And you
It's
don't do
true.
a lot of processing, do you?
No, I mean, I have such a basic pedal rig. Like, I have a distortion, a whammy, and then this
Oh, wait,
funny
you had a
little,
harmonizer on something.
yeah, it's a bass whammy. So it's like, that red pedal that all the guitarists have from the
That's the
90s.
whammy, yeah.
It's that, but it's like the purple one that they released, like, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago. So it has the original bass whammy board on it, but you can flick between. But yeah, I mean, it gives you octave up, octave down, 2 octaves up, 10th, you know, 5th.
Yeah, that's with like the harmony of the whatever overtones.
Yeah.
You know, shout out I have to do because recent cancellations and news of illness. My favorite whammy pedal, expression pedal artist is Frederick Thorndahl of Meshuggah.
Dude, I was so bummed when they postponed their tour.
That would have been next month.
Oh.
So yeah, it was that, and the album is postponed because someone's having health problems. So
they're the best.
But they're the best. And I have to say, we're going to talk about this with Dennis, but I was so happy when I learned that Dennis Chambers was a fan of Thomas Haka, because that's as it should be and as it must be.
He's like, let me put 4 on the hi-hat and then do whatever.
Well, of course, this is the thing about them, right? Everything's in 4, but against 35 beat ideas, so like, good luck.
Everything's in 4, man.
Everything's in 4.
That's what they say.
Not going to help you a lot, but no, it is.
I know, but it's also laughable though.
Right? It's like so really... right. It's so ironic that it's in 4.
Yeah, it's like, oh my God. Okay, wait. This is a total sidetrack, but I've been thinking about it for a minute. When you were talking about I Know You Know, and when you were talking about Dylan's drum style, just like, I guess this is bringing it back to the drums, and in a lot of ways, I don't know, maybe how I've thought of music my whole life, but we grew up in the era where hip hop is pop music. So I grew up not knowing that most songs were sampled, and like a good way to think about that for me is I Know You Know, but it's flipped, and Jill Scott did it. Have you heard Jill Scott's? I forget.
Yeah, because it's in a movie, I think. It's in Biker Boys.
Yeah, so Jill Scott has like a ripping version of it where they turn it though, and it's like the beat's different. And so when you just were talking about that, it made me think about that, and how a lot of times when I write music, it's definitely based on like 4 to 8 bar loops, which can sometimes be not the best, but also I love it. But that's one big thing I've noticed about drumming, and like with Dylan's drumming, there's been songs in this band where like Ben or myself will ask it to be for like more of a loop for a certain section, or that's how it's taught, like kind of based off samples. Anyway, that was a total side tangent, but I've been thinking about it.
Well, music ideas based on concepts fascinate me, and you see that in your discussion right there, and also in Meshuggah, where they're taking a look at a motif, and that motif will go through multiple iterations during the course of its life, and proves positive that you don't need more than 2 good ideas or 3 good ideas, and they're not generally an epic band. There, of course, there's and there's exceptions to that are more, but still the big pieces still come in under 10 minutes, but you feel that you've been taken through a whole thought process of how their music is thought of as a percussion ensemble, how it's thought of as a rhythm machine, how accuracy is highly prized, and then there's wildness. So does that end our little tribute to Meshuggah? I just feel right now such withdrawal, because I did see Violent Sleep a few times. I traveled for it. We got to meet and speak with Thomas, and Thomas, wow. If you're listening, like, anytime, man, Dirk, because those guys are writing that music now. I don't know if people people don't go to that level, but like the music and the lyrics is being written by the bassist and the drummer now. Yeah,
I did know that. I mean, the drummer's written it most of their whole time. But yeah,
for a long time, and all the lyrics. almost all the lyrics.
That's
So,
the band where my stepdad's like, is the CD skipping? Or I was playing a Flying Lotus song one time. It was Tea Leaf Dancers with Andrea Triana. And that was actually one he legitimately was like, hey, will you stop it? It's definitely skipping. I was like,
well,
no.
I had a skipping thing going, and I recorded them because I was listening to, I think, Steve Hackett, Voyage of the Acolyte, and it was skipping. Oh, and Todd Treatise on Cosmic Fire, where they were just old enough, scratched enough that they would skip. And I had an outdoor stereo, and it's a summer thing, and I'm just loving how asymmetrical and bizarre this thing. And then also it was doing variations that I had to record because if you played them all, it would take as long as I was letting it happen. And my neighbor came over because it's the summer.
He's like,
Okay, Greg, that's enough, Greg.
Yes.
So I lowered the volume. I still kept recording because you couldn't think of these variations. They were just so random.
Yeah.
And you bought them as musical fact because they were being performed. I mean, you guys know what I mean, but it is amazing what you can do with that kind of stuff. There was a guy when I came on the scene in the 80s who played with John Zorn when I was playing with John Zorn, and he was named Christian Marclay. He still is, by the way. And he was the first guy that started doing cutting with like a razor album vinyl and gluing it together and then having like stickers to get skips and had cuts to make skips and and then he ended up becoming a very well-known vinyl artist as a medium vinyl.
Okay.
But
Wow.
he would improvise turntables with all sorts of these kinds of alterations to vinyl that the styli would take,
Wild. That's crazy.
in real time. And then I think he might have, well, I mean, the loops were the skips.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think, people are using that with like the sort of recording technology now. People use that to write music. I think like I've been super into Dirty Projectors kind of around the same time as like Hiatus Coyote and all of that. And I know he, will like write something and record it and then he'll reverse it or cut it up in many different ways and then learn how to play it that way. I think that's such a cool, concept of arranging and writing.
Yeah, and going back to Meshuggah, they write away from the instrument.
Mm-hmm.
They're not even writing at the instrument, which, by the way, folks, I think it's the best way to go. But to each his own. But this is such an interesting thing, and composition, I think, is so important with the music we're all talking about, and why groups like Weather Report lasted longer than Mahavishnu and Return to Forever. Not that they didn't have writing of their own, but just that, Wayne Shorter, let's say it, Wayne Shorter, Joe Zawinul, these guys who invented it and opened it up to orchestralism and opened it up to full on improvisation and opened it up to everything being on the table rhythmically, culturally. When you look at Zawinul bringing in African guys, when you look at Zawinul bringing in guys from all over the world to play his music, that whole stew begins in earnest. And you guys, early 70s and late 60s, and you guys are now sort of continuing that. And I just want to say thanks.
Oh man, thank you, Greg. We appreciate that.
Yeah, high compliments, man. That means a lot.
Like my friend Miguel Atwood Ferguson plays violin on all that Flying Lotus and Thundercat stuff. And, same thing with him. Like he's heavily into everything that we're talking about and is arranging from that perspective, and just with Dilla and with everything now in the stew, because rhythm has to evolve, rhythm has to be free. I think, and do what it needs to do, and not be so machinistic that, I mean, that's again the ironies of what I find funny about Meshuggah, to keep coming back to them, is, you know, it's very machinistic, but you don't know what that machine is going to do ahead of time necessarily.
Yeah, totally.
Right? You're going to have to sort of figure out like what pattern is that machine running, you know? And what's that scary vulture of death flying on top of it?
Right. One thing I noticed that's really interesting for our band, at least, is like there'll be like ideas that have been come up with, and I'll have no idea what the counting of it is. And Dylan will be the one that tells us. Like, I forget what song. Oh, is one of Ben's songs. We've been playing it. I've been playing it with Ben for like at least 9 years. And just a month ago, I was like, oh, like, I think I actually know the timing of this one.
Well, let me ask Dylan about this, because this is something you get into as far back as Mahavishnu, where are we talking about groups of threes and twos and twos and threes, Dylan?
I don't know. When rewrite, I don't know. I'm not really thinking of twos and threes, I guess. It's more of the pattern. I don't know. We do a lot of stuff in like 11 and 13. But yeah, for me personally, I'm not thinking twos and threes. It's just,
Like, often you're thinking about like the best way to show it in 4 almost, and like what it is past.
Yeah, I try to think in terms of quarter notes as much as possible. So even if it's 11, I'll be thinking a quarter note until it like skips. So going back to skipping, so it skips and then starts over, and that's kind of how I think about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that is really dealing with the proportions, you know.
Yeah.
Where I overuse the word clave, but it is sort of what's the clave?
Mm-hmm.
And it might be 5.5 something before it gets to something else, but
yeah,
it breathes.
Indeed, yeah.
Dylan's very talkative, just so you know.
Well, and he's suffering from a respiratory disease, so he's still cool though, and you guys are cool, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about this stuff, and I will always be here to do this with the old cats and the young cats and the new cats and the bold cats, and that's just where that's where it is. That's where the music is for me. It's always been there, and Dandu is there because Dandu's doing their own thing, and as it should be. And instrumental music will live, must live in all its forms, in all its mutations and transmutations. And anything you guys want to plug, go ahead.
We mentioned we're working on an album, and who knows when we'll finish that, but it'll be out sometime. And yeah, I think we have a show we can promote, right?
No, we don't even have a show right now. Well, we are doing a show later this month under the name My New Dad. But no, we don't have a Dandu show at the moment. We are releasing an EP in the next couple weeks. It's called Whoops, We Did It Live.
Also wanted to point out that you have this EP.
Yeah, and that's Ben drew that.
And Ben drew the art on it. It's beautiful pen work. And it's called What Are Friends For?
Yes. Yeah, you can buy that on Bandcamp. We have like 3 EPs on Bandcamp. We're on all this.
Dandu.
Dandu. If you Google Dandu music, that'll get you everything. That'll get you our Instagram, Facebook, website, YouTube, all that stuff. but yeah, so we're re-releasing this EP that we put out a year and a half ago, but then I forgot to keep it up on the internet. So we're re-putting it back out. And actually, I forgot Dylan wrote a couple charts for 2 of the 4 songs. So we're going to put out these chord charts with it. You know, I'll have the bass lines and the melodies.
So cover
and
up.
yeah.
Yeah, I recently reissued my Requiem for Jack Kirby album with Interzone, and you can include in the download, you know, all this stuff that you want. So you can include artwork and you can include liner notes. It's just, you know, Bandcamp allows us this, and people might like it and maybe pay a little bit more for it, because it's I think, you know, the digital thing is great, but like nobody has maybe a visual world to go with it, or any information about how the hell it happened. So that's it's a bit of a sidebar, but yeah, I mean, it's really cool that you could put charts in there, and that you should include that, because why not?
Yeah, why the hell not?
So Dandu Music, that's the way to look. And I thank my guests. We have Ben Wyrick, Dylan Johnson, and Sean Dan Durand. And thank you guys, and looking for more from you. So looking forward.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Greg.
Yeah, keep in touch.
Pleasure. Goodbye from the ProgCast. Catch us next time, and always listen to interesting music, please. Bye-bye.
All right. Later, y'all.